Well, welcome. This is just going to be a space for us to connect and for us to talk. I'm LeeAnét Noble. I'm the Director of Equity and Enrichment at Shakespeare Theater Company. I'm also on the artistic team and senior staff at the theater. And I'm really excited today to be in conversation with two of my colleagues who are our new associate directors. We have Whitney White, who's world-renowned director and maker, as well as Dr. Soyica Colbert, who is right now the interim dean at Georgetown University for the College of Arts and Sciences, and the author of the book that we will be talking about today, Radical Vision, Biography of Lorraine Hansberry. So if you don't have this yet, please go pick it up. It is amazing. We stepped into these new roles at Shakespeare Theater Company, so we're going to talk about our roles in the company and what that means, as well as everything that's connected to theater and this wonderful book that has just been released, which is on Oprah's Best of April list, and we're very excited about it. So I'm going to pass the mic, so to say, to Whitney, just so you all can get an introduction from their words. So Whitney, and then we'll pass it to Soyica.
Yeah, it's really nice. I'm really happy that we have this little group. I'm so happy you're here. This work that Soyica has worked on is just incredible. And I'm nerding out because I feel like I've always wanted to do I've always wanted to know someone who's as smart and brilliant as she is, and that she's written this book and I get to talk with you guys about it. You know, I'm a nerd and this is just so great. So I'm excited that we're sharing space around this incredible work that Soyica has released and shared with us all.
Thank you, everyone. It's such a great blessing to be in this conversation, to be in conversation with Whitney and LeeAnét again. We had a chance to work together on James Baldwin's Amen Corner, which was so illuminating and powerful right before the Shakespeare Theater shut down for the pandemic. And so it's been great to think with them about Baldwin, who was a great friend of Hansberry's. And so I'm excited to be in this conversation, which I feel like might be an extension of that work and perhaps, future dreaming about work to come. So thank you.
Great. So we're going to be asking each other questions, and then we'll open up to questions from all of you that are here with us today. I want to start off with Soyica, Dr. Colbert. What was, knowing your work at Georgetown and your work as an author, I would love to hear about your introduction to theater. Like, what connected you to theater?
It's interesting. I guess I have a two-part answer to this story. So when I was a kid, I was in plays, my elementary school. And I guess my parents worked really hard to introduce us to the arts more generally. So my brother and sister both played the piano. I played the guitar for about a week. We were in dance classes. As I said, I participated in community theater as a child. So my parents really wanted us to have sort of a well-rounded education. But I think more in terms of my scholarship, when I started my research in graduate school at Rutgers, I was taking a class on modern drama. And the only African-American writer on the syllabus was Zora Neale Hurston. And I knew that I was going to write my dissertation about African-American literature. And so I decided to write the final paper for that class on Hurston. And I remember marching into my, who would be my dissertation director, Cheryl Wall's office, who was also a leading scholar on Hurston, and asking her if I missed something because I couldn't find any scholarship around Hurston's plays. And, at that time, Hurston, this was circa 2001. So Hurston's picture was in Barnes & Noble. She was a household name. She had been rediscovered by Alice Walker. So surely there was some scholarship around Hurston's plays. And Cheryl said, no one writes about her plays. And so that was my first question as a scholar. Why aren't people writing about this iconic woman's plays? And so then my research for my dissertation, which then turned into my first book, began by thinking about some of the iconic Black writers, including Baldwin, who are more well known for other forms.
It's amazing. I mean, it's just amazing. LeeAnét is going to ask more questions, but it's just you assume with these big titans of history that there's going to be so much scholarship on them. And when we get to my section, I want to talk to you more about this, but it's so amazing how many American greats, not just Black American greats, but she is one of our greatest American thinkers. There's actually hasn't been that much scholarship. Their lives haven't been delved into. And so, we're living in this weird digital time where we're starting to lose our own history. So in a way, this kind of action that you've done and undertaking is just so important. But anyways, I will wait my turn. Go ahead, LeeAnét.
That's all good. There's no order, no turns. But yeah, talking about what needs to happen, things that are happening, and how we can continue to progress. I would love to hear about one thing, I know there's a lot, but one thing you're looking forward to doing in your role at this theater.
Is that for me or Whitney? That's for Whitney, right?
Yeah, that was for Whitney. Sorry.
Well, I have to say to everyone here, it's funny. I see that we have a listener from Ohio. It's like DC is a really special place. It's the seat of our government. It's the center of our country in many ways. And Shakespeare DC is this incredible theater. And even the fact that myself, Soyica, and LeeAnét are connected should show you how special this theater is. We are all talking about the arts and American history and programming. And it's like, we're educators, we're artists, we're thinkers. There's something about Shakespeare DC that's truly, and I'm working all over. It's unlike anywhere else. It's such a perfect triangulation. Sorry. It's such a perfect triangulation of history, of the past, present, and future, of American politics and artistic kind of interest. And I think one thing in particular I'm interested in is continuing this national dialogue. Around how the past collides with the present. So it's like, initiatives, through mentoring artists, through getting plays up, we are taking things like Lorraine Hansberry's life and James Baldwin and Shakespeare, and we're finding how our past is, intersecting with the future so that we don't lose that past. We don't lose our understandings of who we are as Americans. So I'm just excited to be building work in general that feels general, but like not many theaters are as committed to shining light on the American past. Right now, it's very popular to be working on new play development. New plays are important, but we also need to be bridging these pathways between the past, present, and future, right? So that was a long monologue, but that's what I'm excited about.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited about the fact that when we have our artistic meetings in the theater, just the pathways that are opening, the way, looking at books and looking at novels and looking at people that have never really been looked at before in the classic canon. We have this canon that has looked a very particular way for a very long time. So I'm excited about transforming it and shifting it and being on this journey with both of you and our artistic team. I'm going to pass it again back to Whitney. So during this time, we're just going to talk to each other and ask each other questions. So Whitney, if you have any questions for Soyica or myself.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's amazing. It might seem strange that we're talking about this incredible book and also the theater, but the work is all connected. We're all working together in this exciting way. And I think my first question, so in reading the book, I feel very naive in saying I am a Black woman from Chicago. I am a theater maker. I have been studying theater all my life. Lorraine Hansberry was from Chicago, and still I knew all her plays, but I did not understand the extent of her activism and how activism intersected with theater. And I think in this weird way, we're living in a time where theater and television and film in a lot of ways are meant for entertainment or escapism, and it can still do all of it. But will you talk a little bit more about, in chapter 4, you're really talking about her radicalism, and talk to me about how surprising it was for you even to learn as much as you did about her life as an activist versus her life as an artist. I only knew her as a theater maker. And I'm someone who works in theater. I didn't understand the full scope of her life. So just talk to me a little bit about what that was like for you discovering that side of her.
It's been it was so illuminating. So first I must say, how my arrogance. So when I got a fellowship to the Schomburg, which is the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library, which also has Hansberry as well as Baldwin's papers. And I got the fellowship to write this book. And I remember thinking, I'll go to the Schomburg, I'll read these papers really quickly, I'll write this book and I'll be done lickety split. Not realizing the scope of her work. So even though the finding aid is there for anyone to see, the volumes of writing that she did, I had not really, until I got into the archive, understood the magnitude of the amount of work that she's done. And then, of course, when you're trying to tell the story, I think of this as a book that's about a story of her ideas. And so in thinking about her ideas and her development, you go down all these rabbit holes of the people that she associated with, which have their own amazing archives and stories to tell. And so I say all that to say that, Hansberry was deeply invested in the idea that every individual had the capacity to transform the world. And so she saw her art as her avenue of doing that, but she was raised in a family of radicals, of activists, I should say. And she was mentored by radicals, Paul Robeson, W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois said that Hansberry was his favorite student. And so she was Alice Childress, who was also a radical, although people don't know her as such, because her and Robeson had to go underground during the Cold War. And so she was mentored by all of these thinkers and activists, and it informed how she saw herself in the world and all of the work that she did. And so one of the things I try to take up in the book is that although we know her career as starting with The Raising the Sun, Hansberry was writing for leftist, feminist, queer periodicals for a decade, for 9 years before Raising the Sun. And so if she was alive today, none of that history could have been forgotten because we have the internet. But when Raising the Sun premieres, none of the reporters report on any of this public writing that she was doing for almost a decade before. And the reason I raise that is because for me, that was the training ground. Writing as a reporter on independence movements in Africa, on rent strikes, on the civil rights movement, again, on gay and lesbian liberation. These topics were the fodder for her plays, her going to rent strikes, her participating in protests. And so that becomes the fodder for her plays, the training ground for the work that she does. And it continues to inform her even after she becomes more influential and a spokesperson. And so though her identity as an activist is always intertwined with her identity as a playwright, but I think that the public persona that emerges after Raisin doesn't fully account for all of that richness.
And that's crazy because when you think of James Baldwin, it's so easy to point to his plays, his essays, his texts. And it's just like, I think I always bring up Baldwin and Hansberry because, how many American writers alive today can we say were essayists, political thinkers, intellectuals in this way? And so it's like, in a weird way, re-engaging with your book. And I encourage everyone listening here to read the book because it really makes you want to not only go see the theater and see the plays that she wrote, but it makes you want to re-remember a time when intellectualism, activism, politics, and art were a little more closer stitched together. You didn't just go make a Marvel movie and then do nothing else. You had things to say about the world. No shade against Marvel movies, but you had things to say about the world. You were engaged with politics in a particular way. It's beautiful.
Okay. I love these types of moments and what Shakespeare is doing and what LeeAnét is championing, because it's bringing those different aspects together, right, into the conversations, the ways in which the theater is a part of a cultural conversation movement happening in Washington, D.C. Is powerful. Yeah.
So LeeAnét, my question for you is taking it a little bit closer back to theater is can you remember the first time you read or saw A Raisin in the Sun and what it did to you and how you felt? I feel like it's one of those plays that we all, it's like one of the plays. Like, when was the first time you encountered it, and what sticks with you still about it?
I think the first time I encountered it was through the movie as a kid. And one, the connecting the story to the performances. I grew up in a household where I would go to my grandmother's bookshelf and just like grab all sorts of things. Like, I was reading the Angela Davis story when I was a very little girl, and books like The Bluest Eye. So when I saw the film, what stuck to me was the wide array of characters. You had a character who was like, you saw like the dancing and the movement, who was high spirited, and then you had like the mother who was like, I'm not taking any crap, and then you had the wife who was a bit submissive but also forceful, and then you had this man that was going through all of these different journeys in a household full of women. And so I think it was the dynamics of the characters that really drew me in. A lot of times when I would see movies that were in black and white or old school movies, they all were kind of the same. And this
Right.
one had the drama, and it had the heart, and it had so many different elements. And then going to college at Howard and diving into the play and with new perspectives as to how theater should work and how plots should move. It was like,
Yes.
everything. So it has everything. And I think that's why it still resonates today. That's why there's new
Right.
movies coming out of it. And there's a reason for that. So that would be my first introduction was Ruby D and the crew.
Gosh, Ruby D. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Ruby D. Can we all just remember that incredible work? I mean, not to kick it too much back to Shakespeare DC, but again, this is why the dialogue from Shakespeare to Hansberry is so important, because when you go to these plays like A Raisin in the Sun, when you go to a Tennessee Williams, when you go to a Shakespeare, you feel like you're witnessing a titan of the theater. You feel like you're witnessing language that will last forever, the way Shakespeare's language has, because the characters are so essentially true. So yeah, I'm trying to think of my first encounter with the play. I think it was the movie as well, but in the theater, I never saw it live until Liesl Tommy's production at the Huntington, I believe. And I just was like, I wept the whole time, and I knew what was going to happen. It's kind of like a Shakespeare, you go to see Romeo and Juliet. We know those teenagers are going to die by the end of the play, right? Yet you still go. And so what is that weird pathos? What is that catharsis that we're all engaged with when we go see these timely stories? We know how they're going to end, but we need to see it anyway. It's fascinating.
I know. It's so powerful, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because I was curious about both of your first introductions to Hansberry. But I have another question for both of you, and it's related to past and present. And also, another theme that I try to take up in the book, which I call Hansberry a movement baby. And I've already alluded to this a little bit because both of her parents were activists. And so my question is, and Whitney, you can start. Has there been an interaction either with a mentor or a mentee that has transformed or shaped you as an artist? And again, part of what I think was so special about Hansberry and her civil rights generation is the fact that she had been really studying or understanding the civil rights movement since the 40s and started to implement what she learned as a young activist living in New York in the 50s. So I'm just curious if there was a mentee or mentor relationship that has transformed you as an artist.
I mean, yeah, the funny thing, I don't know if people know this, it's interesting for our listeners too. That's such a good question, because theater really is such an old school tradition. Art making, when you look at Michelangelo, and you look at the great artists of the past, that was all based on patronage and systems of patronage and mentorship. And to be honest, theater still works like that today. And for me, I feel lucky I've had a system of mentors. And I think Lynn Nottage is an artist I've been in dialogue with lately. She's incredible, Pulitzer Award-winning writer and thinker, and it's just seeing how she operates in the world and seeing how she's pulling things from she's one of our living greats, you know, she's pulling things from the past, present, and future in this very ambitious, humanistic way. And that's had a huge mark on me. I feel like her work is always putting things in perspective. She's not just making something aesthetic that is cool right now or something that is a fad. You know, she's really making work that's looking at the past, present, and future, and it's had a big effect on me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do anything like that, but I think there's such a bravery in like taking your time to make something substantial. And yeah, she's really had a big effect on me. But you know, for the audience out there, that's how theater works. It's like you're like, I want to be a play director. How do you do that? You kind of have to assist someone. And I've worked with the likes of Sam Gold. He's another mentor of mine. And you know, I moved to New York with like $200 in my bank account, and he let me be his assistant on Othello, a production of Othello. And it was like watching, you have to kind of watch and learn and be someone's apprentice. So theater making can be very old school in that way, you know.
That's amazing. And I think it's powerful when you know you're working with someone who's creating classics. Like as we're thinking about the canon with Shakespeare theater, I mean, I would put Lynn Nowledge in that category. So that's really powerful. LeeAnét, the same question. Have you had a mentor or mentee relationship that's transformed you as an artist?
I feel like I've had a lot. I think watching my grandmother as a little kid, my grandmother was in DC Black Rep, and she performed in theater most of her life and as a classical singer. And so I think seeing what she did and then following my mother around to all of her shows in theater and in the arts had a big influence. And while I was at Howard University, I went to see a production of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom with Charles Dutton and Whoopi Goldberg. And after the show, I always had like a script or something in hand to pass to somebody. This is in college, so I was like 19 or something like that. But I had a script that I worked on. I knew that Charles was a director, and so I passed it to him, and it started a relationship that lasted years, like 10 years, and still going. But just having somebody like him who could teach me not only how things should flow and how things go, but the business of show was very vital, because it's very much a business. And I had a professor that would say, it's not show business, it's business show. And so I think learning all those things from him, as well as looking at his work from theater, from Broadway to television and film as a director and a writer, really had a big influence on me. So I would say his mentorship, and also watching the women in my family, my mother and grandmother.
That's amazing. You know, you're giving me In Search of Our Mother's Gardens vibes with that answer, which is also sort of the other piece of thinking about, you know, intergenerational feminist mentoring, which is also part of what shaped Hansberry.
Absolutely.
I have a little question for our group. Is it okay? I'm breaking the script. I don't think it's my time to ask a question, but I think it could be interesting, because it's like when you go to the theater, you don't want to hear a lecture, right? It's like, that's why things that are overly political can be such a drag, because it's like you want to go to the theater to see stories and experience all this passion. But I think my question for both of you is like, Baldwin and Hansberry were these huge intellectual minds. There are some artists, what I'm trying to get at is there are some artists who are only engaged with theater making in a very kind of not limited but specific way. The aesthetics of it, they're not as engaged with the kind of intellectual side with it, with the thought making processes and all that. What do you think? Do you think that, like, for Hansberry, that intellectual side of her brings something unique to her plays? Because her brain was so huge, and yet when you go see her plays, you're not like, oh God, you don't feel like you're just listening to a New York Times article or something. You feel like you're seeing a snapshot of a world. So do you think all that experience she had in the intellectual world, activist world, radical Black world brings something special to her writing? That's kind of for both of you.
I think so. I mean, one of the things that's magical to me, powerful to me about Raisin in the Sun is that you really do get a sense of her radicalism in a commercial play. And so, she talks about Ask the Guy being telling the moral of the play. You get this sense of self-possession with Beneatha, and even her cutting her hair as this mode of self-possession, Hansberry's investment in sort of the quotidian, everyday revolutionary act as the transformation of society. And so I think that understanding her investment in Marxism and existentialism helps you to see the plays in different ways. But I think that it's all there in the play without being burdensome or being didactic. But the other piece is, she left so many fragments in her archives because she died so young. She died at 34. And I think one of the things that's exciting about going to her archive is seeing the unfinished work that could be rediscovered in this moment and understanding her vision. And so I think that's another exciting piece, that there's lots of, unpolished diamonds of ideas and kernels of ideas that are laying in her archive that are waiting to be discovered that she left for us.
Yeah, that also hits me, like, if we hadn't lost her at such a young age, what would have been the influence on theater? But also knowing the politics, it goes back to what I was mentioning, the business of show. James Baldwin, the Amen Corner was finished. And however, it didn't last long on Broadway. It didn't, it's something that I was very familiar with because of my experience at Howard. I would see a lot of smaller productions of the Amen Corner, but it was just more rare. And just like Lorraine Hansberry, we always speak about A Raisin in the Sun. And she's able to take life, but intertwine those parts that she's been informed with from her activism and from having so much knowledge on politics and policies as well.
I can respond to Drew's question, which is about Hansberry's fragments, including Toussaint and, LeBlanc, and also how was it to work with the estate? Are they interested in developing any of these works? I would say that in reading Toussaint specifically alongside LeBlanc, you get a sense of a fuller understanding of Hansberry's revolutionary vision. And so she has a scene from a play called Toussaint, and there's other versions of it that are a little bit longer, but it's all taking place in a sitting room, and there's a revolution that's happening outside. And so that play, alongside The Drinking Gourd, which is about slavery, one of the things that I've learned from those two pieces, The Drinking Gourd is a screenplay, is that Hansberry would be distinctive in our current moment, because instead of showing the horror and the gruesomeness of colonialism and slavery, although there is some of that in The Drinking Gourd, but instead of focusing there, she actually focuses on Black people's possibility in those spaces. And so the example that I can give is there's this moment in The Drinking Gourd where the main character is mutilated. And Hansberry calls not to focus on the character's mutilation like you might see in 12 Years a Slave, but to focus on the enslaver that mutilates. Because Hansberry is asking the viewer to look at the person who is doing the violence rather than exactly. Really? And so it's those types of things that I think could be activated. And it's a similar tone in Toussaint, to answer Drew's question more specifically. I think those types of things could be activated if one were to produce a revival of one of her works. I'm not sure about the estate. I will say, though, that they were extremely generous with me. They allowed me to quote from things that have never been published and have access to pieces that are not, that you have to ask for access to. So they're extremely generous with me, and I think they're excited about the work circulating.
So exciting. I have a question for the doctor. I mean, our hour is coming up, but I feel like You guys, you need to buy this book and read it. And so what is one thing you want us and the audience to know, or what's one thing you're really excited for us to discover in reading your beautiful work? I cannot say again how powerful it is, but what's something you want us to know? What's a juicy tidbit?
Oh, a juicy tidbit. Hansberry was so much more. I love Raising the Sun. And like I said, I think it contains her radical vision, but she was so much more than what we often think about when we think about that play. She was, she was, when she wrote to Marxist periodicals, for Marxist periodicals in the 50s, she was writing about race issues. When she wrote to gay and lesbian periodicals, she was writing about what does it mean to be a woman and to be a Black woman. She was constantly bringing intersections of herself to every table that she sat down at, knowing that she didn't fit in any group. She was always, if she was with her queer friends, she was usually the only Black person. When she was with her, civil rights friends, she might be one of the few queer people. And so she was always bringing, or a woman, she was always bringing those different sides of herself to every issue, and doing it in a fearless way. But at the same time, internally, she was struggling. And so although you might experience her on tape as being very assertive and clear-sighted, which she was, she often talked about how much anxiety she had, how nervous she was, how she was terrified of hospitals, but spent so much of her life in the hospital at a young age, how she was terrified of elevators, so she would always walk up the stairs, but people just thought she liked to walk up the stairs. I mean, there's all of this vulnerability that she had that you might not get in recordings of her, that I think, again, helps to humanize her and helps me at least to think about what does it mean to be truly powerful in the world, even as someone with vulnerabilities. And so I guess the only other thing I would say that has been important for me is that Hansberry was living through world-changing times, through despair, through times similar to our own. And so for me, her life is a lesson of how to be clear-sighted and committed in the midst of what feels like all-encompassing impossibility of death and dying, of, tragedy. How to, be committed in the midst of tragedy, and her ability to see past the moment, what was coming next. I mean, in the 50s, she's writing about what we think of as Black power now. In the 50s, she's thinking about Black power. She's talking about Black being beautiful. And so her prophetic sense, I also think is really powerful too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in, for joining us on this ride. I hope that you all go to pick up this book. It's so good, front to back. Well, I'm working through, but I know it's good front to back. But yes, indeed. And thank you for the questions. And we hope to have more of these. We will be talking and chatting more in our connection on the artistic team at Shakespeare and in our new roles as we step in and get comfortable and make waves. So thank you all. Go pick up the book, Radical Vision, a biography of Lorraine Hansberry. And we will see you soon, and hope to see you soon enough in the theater.